Clara had always enjoyed quiet evenings in her little apartment, the kind of nights where the rain tapped softly on the windows and the smell of wet earth drifted through the slightly open window, filling the room with a fresh, clean scent that made everything feel calm and alive. But that night, the calm felt fragile, almost like it was holding its breath, and she noticed Ethan, her 19-year-old nephew, standing outside her living room door, shifting nervously from foot to foot, his hoodie damp from the rain and his hands twisting together in a way that suggested he had been holding back for a long time, and something about his posture made her heart tighten, an instinctive worry she couldn't ignore, because Ethan had always been bright, lively, and independent, yet now he looked smaller somehow, weighed down by something invisible, and Clara felt that tug in her chest that told her tonight was different, that something important was about to happen, though she couldn't guess exactly what, and she stepped closer, putting on a warm, calm smile, trying to lighten the tension as she asked lightly if he had finished his homework or wanted some tea, anything to make him relax, but Ethan didn't respond immediately. He just looked at the floor, eyes shadowed with hesitation, as if he was walking a tightrope across a truth he wasn't sure anyone could understand, and Clara's instincts told her that this wasn't ordinary teenage anxiety, this was something deeper, more personal, something he needed to share but couldn't yet find the words for, and she felt her pulse quicken just watching him struggle internally, and she reached out gently, putting a hand on his shoulder, careful not to force him, and said softly, "Ethan, you know you can tell me anything," letting her voice carry warmth, patience, and care all at once, the kind of soft reassurance that might give him the courage to speak, and for a long moment, he just stayed still, his gaze still on the floor, and then, finally, his voice came, barely audible, breaking the heavy silence like the first drop of rain hitting dry soil. I need to tell you something," and the words hung in the air, and Clara felt a shiver run down her spine, a mixture of curiosity, concern, and the sense that whatever he was about to share could change the course of the evening, perhaps even their relationship, and she gestured for him to come in, guiding him toward the couch while keeping her tone light, careful, as if saying, "You're safe here, nothing bad can happen," because the look on his face told her he didn't feel safe even in his own skin, that he had been carrying this burden alone, maybe for weeks, maybe for months, and Clara felt a deep empathy, a pull in her heart that was both protective and tender, because she had seen how difficult it could be to confide in someone, to expose that inner fear, longing, or secret that everyone else might judge or misunderstand, and as they sat down, the rain tapping a soft rhythm against the windows, she noticed the way he avoided her eyes, the way his fingers fidgeted in his lap, the subtle tremor in his shoulders that spoke of nerves and anxiety, and Clara realized that tonight wasn't about casual conversation, it was about trust, about vulnerability, about the courage it took to let someone in when the world had felt overwhelming and isolating, and she leaned slightly forward, encouraging him without words, creating space in the silence for him to start, and Ethan swallowed hard, the sound almost lost beneath the soft hum of the rain, before he finally lifted his eyes, revealing pupils wide with anticipation, fear, and a strange intensity that made Clara's heart ache in a way she hadn't expected, because there was something raw in his gaze, something honest, something that demanded her full attention and full care, and she felt her own chest tighten as if she were sensing the weight of what he had been carrying alone, and she realized that this night, this quiet moment in her small living room, could be a turning point, that one revelation could change everything about how they saw each other, about how he saw himself, and she tried to stay calm, to keep her voice steady, to let him feel that she would not recoil or judge, and she reminded herself that often the hardest truths were the ones that needed the most patience and love, and as Ethan began to speak, the words spilling slowly, carefully, like a river finding its path through rocks and soil, Clara listened, absorbing every syllable, every pause, every tremor in his voice, every half-smile of nervous hope, and she noticed the way he leaned forward slightly when a word he wanted to say finally came out, the way his hands unclenched just a little as if the act of speaking gave him a small measure of relief, and she felt her own heart respond in a way she hadn't anticipated, a combination of pride, affection, concern, and something more subtle, a recognition of the depth of emotion that was now between them, palpable, delicate, and potent, and the rain outside seemed to intensify, tapping faster against the windows, echoing the rhythm of her heart as she realized that this quiet talk, which had begun with nothing more than an uneasy knock at the door, was about to unfold into something far bigger, something life-changing, because the courage of a single confession could shift relationships, understanding, and the very way people felt about each other, and Clara's mind raced with possibilities, worries, hopes, and anticipations, each emotion layering over the other, creating a tense yet intimate atmosphere, and she knew that whatever Ethan revealed next would demand her full presence, her empathy, her listening heart, and her patience, because sometimes life's most profound moments came in whispered admissions and in the raw honesty of those we loved most, and as he took a shaky breath and began to speak, she leaned in slightly, eyes soft, voice silent but attentive, ready to catch every word, every nuance, every tremor of feeling, and she understood, with a clarity that startled her, that tonight was not just a conversation, it was the beginning of a journey, one that might bring understanding, healing, connection, and perhaps even transformation, and she felt the first stirrings of something bittersweet and tender in her chest, a delicate mixture of longing, protectiveness, and the kind of emotional resonance that could linger long after the words were spoken, and the room seemed to shrink around them, the rain a distant drumbeat, the couch a small island of intimacy, the air thick with unspoken questions and the fragile beauty of honesty, and Clara knew, as she reached for Ethan's hand once more, that this was the night when a quiet talk would become far more than words, that it would mark the start of a revelation that could reshape hearts, relationships, and perspectives, that the confession waiting on his lips was not just about a secret but about trust, courage, and the intricate, delicate human emotions that bind people together. And as Ethan finally lifted his head fully, meeting her gaze with trembling vulnerability, Clara felt a shiver of anticipation run through her, knowing that whatever came next would stay with them both forever, and in that charged, silent moment, filled with rain, warmth, and the weight of unspoken truths, the stage was set for a life-changing revelation, one that neither of them could have predicted, and Clara silently braced herself, heart open, ready, waiting for Ethan's voice to unfold the story he had carried alone, a story that would shift the night, their connection, and perhaps the way they both understood the world around them. Ethan's voice was soft at first, almost hesitant, and Clara leaned in closer, her presence steady and calm, a quiet anchor in the small living room that had suddenly become the center of something far bigger than either of them had expected, and as he began to speak, the words came slowly at first, fragmented and cautious, revealing a heart weighed down by confusion, longing, and emotions he hadn't shared with anyone, not even with his closest friends, and Clara listened intently, every word a delicate thread weaving a connection between them, her heart tightening as she realized how vulnerable he was being, how much courage it took to open up in this way, and the first thing he admitted was that he had been struggling with feelings he didn't fully understand, feelings that pulled him in directions that were new, confusing, and sometimes frightening, emotions that made him question himself, his choices, and even the world around him, and Clara felt an unexpected ache in her chest, a deep empathy for the way he carried so much inside, quietly, alone, and she reached for his hand, not forcefully but gently, letting her warmth remind him that he wasn't facing this by himself, that someone cared deeply enough to stay and listen without judgment, and as Ethan continued, his words revealed the subtle beginnings of a crush, a tender, innocent, yet all-consuming attraction to someone in his life, someone he admired, thought about constantly, and longed to be closer to, yet feared expressing, fearing judgment or rejection, fearing that such honesty would make him seem weak or strange in the eyes of others. And Clara nodded quietly, encouraging him to go on, to explore his feelings openly, letting him know that his emotions were natural, valid, and worthy of being acknowledged, and she could feel the tension in his shoulders easing slightly as he realized she was not recoiling, that she was offering empathy, understanding, and acceptance, and he told her about the small things that made his heart race, the quiet smile of the person he liked, the way their laughter felt like sunlight breaking through clouds, the little conversations that lingered in his mind long after they ended, and Clara felt her chest ache in a different way, not for herself but for him, for the purity of his longing, the bravery it took to feel so intensely, and the way he trusted her with these thoughts despite his fear, and as he spoke, she noticed the subtle tremble in his voice when he admitted that sometimes these feelings confused him, that he didn't know if he was supposed to feel this way, or if it was normal, And she smiled gently, reassuring him that feeling deeply, longing, and even feeling heartbreak or uncertainty were part of being human, and she told him that it was okay to feel, okay to question, and okay to let those emotions exist without fear, and Ethan's eyes glistened, a mixture of relief and gratitude washing over him, and he exhaled slowly, as if a weight he hadn't realized he carried had been lifted just a little by sharing this truth, and Clara's heart swelled with affection for him. Not in a romantic way toward him, but in a protective, tender, deeply human connection, the kind that binds people through empathy, understanding, and shared vulnerability, and she could see the subtle shift in him, the way his posture relaxed, the way his hands unclenched, the way his gaze met hers for a moment longer than before, seeking reassurance, affirmation, and simply to feel seen, and the room, filled with the faint scent of coffee and the rhythmic patter of rain outside, seemed to cocoon them, creating a private space where honesty, emotion, and connection could flow freely without interruption, and Clara realized that this conversation, simple on the surface yet profound in depth, was teaching her as much as it was teaching him, reminding her that the human heart is fragile, brave, and complex, and that sometimes the act of listening is more powerful than giving advice, more transformative than any action, and as Ethan continued, he began to open up about his fears, about how he worried that his emotions might be dismissed, misunderstood, or worse, laughed at, and Clara felt a deep protective instinct rise within her, a desire to shield him from the harshness of a world that didn't always value honesty, a desire to nurture his courage, to remind him that he was strong for speaking, and as she spoke softly, telling him that emotions are not weaknesses, that vulnerability is strength, and that everyone deserves to be understood, she saw a flicker of hope in his eyes, a small but powerful spark that perhaps the world could be a place where he could express himself without fear. And then Ethan admitted that he had spent countless nights thinking about what he would say, rehearsing in his mind, imagining different scenarios, wondering if anyone would truly listen, and Clara felt a pang of sadness for the loneliness he must have endured, carrying this heartache and longing in silence, and she squeezed his hand gently, letting him know that at this moment, at least, he was not alone, that his feelings mattered, and that the very act of sharing them was a triumph, a courageous step towards self-understanding and connection, and as the minutes passed, their conversation deepened, moving from the surface of attraction and confusion into the subtler realms of emotional intimacy, exploring the ways people form attachments, how longing can create both joy and ache, and how sharing truth can lighten the heaviest burdens, and Clara felt a swell of admiration for him, for the clarity with which he expressed emotions he had struggled to name, and for the bravery it took to trust her with something so private, so delicate, so transformative, and she began to reflect quietly on her own experiences, the moments in her life when she had felt longing, heartbreak, and the tender ache of unspoken emotions, realizing that in listening to Ethan, she was reminded of the universality of human feeling, that everyone, at some point, wrestles with emotions too complicated to explain, and that the act of opening up can be both terrifying and freeing, and as Ethan spoke, he confessed that sometimes he felt guilty for feeling so much, that the intensity of his emotions overwhelmed him, made him anxious, and that he had been trying to hide them, to suppress them, fearing that they were too much for anyone else to handle, and Clara leaned forward, eyes soft, voice gentle, telling him that emotions are never too much, that they are part of the human experience, and that by acknowledging them, he was learning to honor himself, and that no matter what path he took, expressing and accepting his feelings would make him stronger, more resilient, more in touch with the essence of who he was, and Ethan's lips parted slightly, a small sigh escaping, as though a release had been granted through understanding, and the tension in his body softened, the nervous energy that had defined the evening slowly shifting into calm, trust, and a tentative peace, and Clara realized that this quiet, intimate exchange was changing something in both of them, that the depth of honesty and empathy shared in this room was a rare gift, a seed of emotional growth that could not be undone, that could shape the way he viewed himself, others, and the relationships he would form in the future, and she felt the delicate warmth of connection, the subtle thrill of witnessing someone confront their own heart with courage, the quiet, almost sacred responsibility of being present in someone else's vulnerability, and she watched as Ethan's eyes brightened just slightly, as if the act of speaking aloud what he had buried was bringing relief, a hint of hope, a small glow of self-acceptance, and she silently acknowledged that this was the essence of intimacy, of human connection, of life-changing revelations. That sometimes it takes nothing more than a quiet talk, a safe space, and an attentive listener to transform uncertainty into courage, confusion into clarity, and fear into understanding. And as the rain outside began to lighten, the world beyond the apartment fading into a blur of gray and silver, Clara felt the subtle shift in the room, a gentle yet undeniable movement toward healing, trust, and the tender acknowledgement of what it means to feel deeply, to care, to be human. And just as Ethan paused, glancing toward the window at the soft evening light filtering through the raindrops, he admitted, voice trembling but steady, that he didn't know what the future held, that he feared misunderstanding, rejection, and heartbreak, but that sharing his truth, even in fragments, was the first step toward freedom. And Clara squeezed his hand again, smiling softly, telling him that the first step is always the hardest, that speaking the truth is an act of bravery, and that no matter what happened next, he had proven to himself how strong, honest, and worthy he was. And for a long moment they sat in silence, absorbing the gravity and the beauty of what had been shared, letting the quiet intimacy of the room, the rhythm of the rain, and the warmth of their connection fill every corner. And Clara realized that this night, this single conversation, had already begun to change both of them, that the revelation Ethan had offered was not just a story, not just a secret, but a bridge, a doorway into a deeper understanding of self, of emotions, and of the bonds that can form when courage meets empathy. And she felt a surge of hope, tenderness, and anticipation for the moments to come, knowing that the journey they had begun would unfold slowly, carefully, beautifully, with every word, every gesture, every shared emotion deepening their connection. And in that quiet, rain-kissed room, they both understood that some conversations are life-changing, that some revelations, spoken in trust and vulnerability, can shift hearts, open minds, and leave an imprint that lasts far longer than the rain, the evening, or even the words themselves. And as Ethan exhaled, a mixture of relief and gratitude on his face, Clara knew that the night was far from over, that the emotional journey had only begun, and that the path ahead, though uncertain, was now shared, and that in itself was a revelation powerful enough to change everything. The night grew quieter as the rain outside softened to a gentle drizzle, and Clara noticed a subtle shift in Ethan, a small but significant change in the way he carried himself, as if speaking his feelings had lifted a weight he didn't even fully realize he had been carrying. And she felt a mixture of relief and curiosity, because now the room held a different energy, one charged with unspoken possibilities, with emotions hovering between them like delicate threads that could either tangle or weave something beautiful. And she could see in his eyes that while he had found a small measure of comfort in sharing, there was still a storm inside him, an uncertainty about the world, about himself, and about how to navigate the complex feelings that had suddenly become so real, so urgent. And she leaned slightly forward, keeping her voice gentle, offering reassurance without words, just presence, because sometimes being still and patient is louder than speaking. And Ethan's gaze drifted toward the window, watching the streaks of rain blur the streetlights, and he took a deep breath, exhaling slowly, as though the act of breathing itself could help him untangle the web of longing, confusion, and hope that had built up inside. And Clara noticed the subtle tension in his shoulders easing, the small way his hands unclenched, the softening of his posture. And she realized that this was the quiet moment when trust deepens, when vulnerability becomes something almost sacred, a fragile yet powerful connection. And she felt the thrill of responsibility, the delicate charge of witnessing someone's heart open and knowing that she had been trusted, chosen, as a safe harbor. And that realization brought with it a mix of emotions, pride, tenderness, protectiveness, and a strange, unnameable warmth that had nothing to do with herself but everything to do with human closeness, the kind that is rare and precious and leaves a lasting imprint. And Ethan finally spoke again, his words coming slower now, more deliberate, carrying the weight of introspection, the careful self-examination of someone trying to understand what they feel, why they feel it, and how to live with it without fear or shame. And he talked about moments of longing, of attraction that made his heart race unexpectedly, of quiet memories that lingered, of thoughts he couldn't stop replaying in his mind, the subtle ache of first crushes and the tender intensity of wanting someone so deeply yet fearing the consequences. And Clara listened without interruption, her mind following every twist and turn of his emotions, empathizing, understanding, and silently acknowledging how brave he was to articulate what so many people hide, what so many keep locked away even from themselves. And she felt a pulse of emotion that surprised her, a gentle swell of connection that seemed to fill the room, making the rain outside seem even softer, almost protective, as if nature itself recognized the intimacy of the moment. And she noticed that his voice grew steadier as he realized that she wasn't judging, that she wasn't recoiling or offering platitudes, that she was simply present, and the power of being witnessed without expectation seemed to give him strength, courage, and clarity all at once. And then he paused, hesitating, and Clara felt the quiet suspense, the subtle hook that made the night feel alive with possibility, as though the next words could transform the air itself, and she leaned in slightly, encouraging him to continue. And finally, he admitted something deeper, something he had been afraid to name even in his own mind, a vulnerability that went beyond simple attraction, a longing that touched the heart, the soul, and his sense of identity. And Clara felt her chest tighten, not with shock, but with the intensity of shared humanity, recognizing in him the same fears, hopes, and questions that everyone carries. And she responded gently, softly guiding him to explore his feelings without fear, without shame, encouraging him to accept that emotions are complex, messy, and beautiful, and that they don't need immediate answers, that some truths simply need acknowledgement, reflection, and patience. And Ethan nodded, a subtle exhale of relief escaping him, a quiet surrender to the acceptance he had longed for. And Clara felt a wave of admiration for him, for the courage it took to speak, for the sensitivity, depth, and honesty he carried in every word, every pause, every glance. And she realized that this conversation was no longer just about a secret, it was about learning to trust, to be honest, and to navigate the messy beauty of human emotion. And as Ethan looked at her with a faint, almost shy smile, she noticed the flicker of hope, the gentle light of self-understanding beginning to appear in his eyes, and she felt her own heart respond in an odd, subtle way, a tender awareness that when someone reveals themselves fully, the act ripples outward, touching everyone who witnesses it, and that she had become part of something fragile, profound, and unforgettable. And he began to talk about the small joys that had lately seemed to define his days, the quick laugh shared with a friend, the warmth of a kind word, the subtle moments when he felt alive and seen. And Clara realized that he was learning to appreciate emotion itself, to honor it rather than fear it, to embrace it as a part of life's richness. And she felt a surge of hope for him, for the person he was becoming, for the emotional resilience he was cultivating in the safety of this room. And then he confessed his lingering fears, how some days the intensity of his feelings overwhelmed him, how he worried that others might not understand, how he sometimes felt isolated in his heart. And Clara nodded quietly, acknowledging the reality of fear, but reminding him that vulnerability is strength, and that it is human to feel deeply, to stumble, to hesitate, and to continue despite uncertainty. And Ethan's shoulders relaxed further, the tension melting almost imperceptibly, the faint curve of a smile appearing. And Clara felt the delicate beauty of the moment, the subtle intimacy of shared emotions, the weightless yet profound nature of a conversation that touches the soul without needing words to explain it fully. And she saw that the quietness around them, the soft glow of the lamps, the gentle tick of the clock, the drizzle outside, all combined to make the room a sanctuary, a place where emotions could breathe, where hearts could speak without fear, and where understanding could blossom like a fragile flower nurtured in silence. And Ethan's voice grew firmer, more confident, as he acknowledged the ways he wanted to act on his feelings, the small steps he longed to take to express himself. And Clara encouraged him, not by giving instructions or solutions, but by affirming his right to feel, to explore, and to take life at his own pace. And he responded with subtle gratitude, a softness in his eyes, a warmth in his expression that made Clara realize just how much this moment meant to him, how life-altering it could feel to finally be heard, truly heard. And as the evening deepened, he shared the delicate ache of longing, the bittersweet joy of hope mingled with fear, and the quiet thrill of anticipation that comes with admitting a heart's desire. And Clara felt her own pulse quicken, a mix of protectiveness, empathy, and the quiet wonder of observing human emotion in its raw, unguarded form. And she understood, in that instant, the power of listening, of presence, of patience. and of the quiet courage that can ripple outward when someone trusts another with their deepest feelings. And Ethan, sensing the safety in her eyes, continued to speak of dreams, small hopes, and the desire to navigate life's emotional maze with honesty and care. And Clara felt the subtle magic of the room, the way the rain, the dim lighting, and the quiet intimacy seemed to cocoon them, shielding them from the outside world, creating a sacred space where the mind could breathe and the heart could speak. And she realized that tonight, this one evening, this conversation was already changing him, shaping his understanding of himself, and deepening the trust and bond between them. And the thought brought a tender ache of emotion, a mix of love, admiration, and the quiet recognition of how rare and precious such moments are. And just as Ethan began to pause, his gaze drifting to the window, a faint shadow of uncertainty flickering in his eyes, Clara felt a small tension return, the subtle reminder that life outside this room, the world beyond the rain, would not pause, that challenges, fears, and judgments would always exist, but that the courage he had shown tonight, the bravery of speaking, would give him the strength to face them. And she felt a surge of hope and resolve, knowing that this quiet talk had already planted seeds of growth, resilience, and emotional awareness. And she saw that Ethan, for all his fears, was beginning to carry himself with a subtle grace, a quiet confidence born not of certainty but of honesty and trust. And as he looked back at her with a soft, almost shy smile, she realized that this revelation, though incomplete, was life-changing, that it had shifted the energy between them, deepened the connection, and opened a doorway to understanding, empathy, and the subtle, profound beauty of feeling deeply, fully, and without shame. And the room seemed to hold its breath as if recognizing the significance of what had been shared, the sacredness of vulnerability, the quiet power of honesty. And Clara, sitting beside him, heart full, eyes soft, and spirit quietly moved, understood that sometimes the simplest conversations can change everything, can shape the way hearts perceive themselves in each other. And that tonight, in this rain-kissed room, with a gentle warmth filling the air and the soft hum of life continuing outside, they had crossed a threshold, one that would stay with them both, one that would echo in memory, thought, and feeling, because a quiet talk, a safe space, and a heart willing to listen had turned into a life-changing revelation. And Clara knew with certainty that whatever came next, both of them had already been transformed, and that the journey was only just beginning. The room was quiet now, the rain having slowed to a soft drizzle that shimmered against the streetlights outside, casting a gentle glow across the living room where Clara and Ethan sat, still processing the depth of their conversation. And Clara noticed the subtle shift in him, the way his posture was steadier, his breathing calmer, his eyes carrying a quiet light, a fragile hope that had not been there before. And she felt an unexpected warmth in her chest, the kind that comes from witnessing courage, from seeing someone take a step toward honesty and self-acceptance. And Ethan looked at her again, hesitating for a moment, the weight of what he was about to say palpable in the air, as if the words themselves were delicate enough to change the balance of the room. And he took a deep breath, letting it out slowly, and admitted that sharing his feelings, speaking his truth, had been the hardest thing he had ever done, that it terrified him to imagine rejection or misunderstanding, yet at the same time, it had brought a relief he hadn't anticipated, a lightness he had almost forgotten existed. And Clara reached for his hand once more, a silent promise that she was here, that she believed him, that he was safe. And he felt that reassurance, the gentle firmness of her presence, the quiet strength that allowed him to be vulnerable without fear. And he smiled faintly, a small, shy expression that seemed to carry months of tension, worry, and longing, all melting in that single gesture. And Clara's heart swelled with something tender and protective, an emotion she hadn't expected but recognized immediately as the natural response to someone entrusting their deepest self to you. And she encouraged him, softly, gently, to continue to explore what it meant to feel so deeply. And Ethan did, speaking of the dreams he had once kept locked away, of the moments that had felt alive and intense, of the quiet joys and small heartaches that had shaped his recent days. And Clara listened, absorbing each word, each pause, each subtle inflection, feeling the intimacy of shared emotion, the gravity of honesty, the profound beauty of trust. And she realized that these moments, fleeting as they might seem, were transformative, not just for him but for both of them, and that the quiet connection they had forged tonight would linger, shaping the way they saw each other, felt about each other, and understood themselves. and Ethan spoke next of hope, of the tentative dreams he had been too afraid to voice, the longing for acceptance, the desire to be understood, to be seen fully without judgment, and Clara felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, not from sadness but from the intense humanity of it all, the way someone's heart could be so raw, so honest, and yet so beautiful, and she gently reassured him that his feelings were valid, that every emotion he experienced mattered, that there was strength in embracing who he was and allowing those feelings to exist without shame, and Ethan nodded, exhaling slowly, as if the simple acknowledgement of his heart's truth could carry him forward into a new realm of courage and self-acceptance, and as he continued, he spoke of the subtle moments that had filled him with joy, the fleeting glimpses of connection with the person he admired, the spark of curiosity and excitement that had made him feel alive, and Clara realized he was beginning to see himself differently, to embrace the beauty of being alive and feeling deeply, and she felt a gentle swell of pride and hope, knowing that this night, this quiet conversation, had opened a door he might never have found on his own, and that the act of sharing his inner world had already started to transform him, gently, irreversibly, beautifully, and as the minutes stretched, he admitted his fears of heartbreak, of misunderstanding, of failing to live up to expectations, and Clara nodded, reassuring him that fear is part of life, part of love, part of growth, and that it is in facing fear with honesty that people discover resilience, clarity, and the power of choice, and Ethan's eyes glimmered with a mixture of relief and tentative determination, the tension in his body softening further, the uncertainty giving way to a quiet courage, a recognition that he had been brave, that he had spoken his truth, and that he could continue to do so in the days ahead, and Clara felt a warm, almost dizzying sense of connection, the subtle thrill of shared humanity, the way one quiet conversation could ripple outward, touching hearts, shaping perspectives, and planting seeds of emotional strength that might grow for years to come, and as Ethan's gaze shifted toward the window, watching the softened city lights reflecting on the rain-slicked streets, he admitted that he felt lighter, freer, as if the burden he had carried alone had finally been shared, even partially, and Clara felt her chest tighten with joy, relief, and a delicate tenderness, the mix of emotions that comes when someone we care for takes the first step towards self-discovery and acceptance, and she smiled softly, telling him that what he had done was courageous, that speaking the truth of the heart is never easy, but it is always transformative, and he looked at her with eyes wide, absorbing the words, the support, the warmth, and she saw him beginning to imagine a life where honesty and openness could guide him, where vulnerability became strength, where longing could be understood rather than feared, and she realized that tonight had given him a gift he might carry forever, a quiet affirmation of self-worth, courage, and the beauty of human connection, and as he settled back slightly on the couch, a small, contented sigh escaping his lips, she saw the subtle glow of possibility in his expression, the gentle awakening of self-confidence and hope, and Clara herself felt changed, moved, inspired, the depth of their conversation leaving a lingering warmth in her chest, a soft ache of empathy and love for someone so precious, so brave, so human, and she reflected on how rare it is to witness such honesty, how fragile and valuable these moments are, how much life can shift in a single evening of courage and connection, and Ethan spoke again, this time of plans, of dreams he had quietly nurtured but never voiced, small ambitions, moments of happiness he longed to create, and Clara encouraged him, reminding him that feeling is not weakness, that dreaming is not folly, that being human is full of possibility when one faces it with honesty and care, and he nodded, a small, firm resolve appearing in his features, a silent vow to live more openly, more honestly, more courageously, and Clara felt the depth of the bond between them, the unspoken understanding that had blossomed in the quiet intimacy of the living room, that one night, one conversation, could mark the start of profound change, and as Ethan finally rose to leave, the rain having nearly stopped and the first hints of moonlight glimmering through the clouds, he paused at the door, turning to Clara with a soft smile, eyes shining with gratitude, relief, and something unspoken but deeply felt, and she smiled back, heart full, knowing that this night would linger in memory, that the revelation shared had shifted both of them in ways subtle yet profound, and as he walked toward his room, she realized that trust, honesty, and vulnerability were not just tools for healing, but bridges to deeper connection, that by being present, by listening, by caring without judgment, one could change someone's life in ways that echo forever, and she felt a quiet awe at the power of human emotion, the beauty of hearts laid bare, the delicate thrill of witnessing courage, and she knew that this evening, this quiet talk, had become more than a conversation. It had become a life-changing revelation, a gentle, enduring reminder that honesty, empathy, and love, in all their subtle, human forms, have the power to transform, to heal, and to illuminate the path ahead. And as Clara finally settled back on the couch, listening to the distant sounds of the city waking under the soft post-rain air, she felt the lingering warmth of connection, the delicate glow of understanding, and the quiet certainty that this night, their trust, and their shared vulnerability would stay with them both forever, shaping not just their bond, but their hearts, their choices, and the way they would see themselves and each other in all the days to come, a revelation that had begun in a single, quiet conversation, and had blossomed into something enduring, life-altering, and unforgettable. And as the moonlight touched the room, faint and silver, she exhaled slowly, knowing that some nights are not just nights, some talks are not just words, and some revelations quietly, gently, irreversibly change the course of life, and this, she realized, was exactly such a night.